I hope you had a wonderful weekend, ladies and gentlemen. Jeremy Cordeau, Peter Clayton in the garage, the court of public opinion, for another week. On Facebook and on various podcasts. I think there's Google and there's, what else is there, Pete?
Cloud, I think.
Spotify, Google, Apple, or wherever you get your favourite. And I'd love to think that we would become one of your favourite iPods, not iPods. Podcasts. I've got to learn the lingo.
Me too.
Yeah. How are you feeling, Pete?
Good. Well, yeah.
Yeah, Pete, we got to tell you, Pete decided that he was going to be heroic and he was going to climb Mount Lofty.
Yes.
That's just up here, behind us, here in Glen Osmond, and it's a hell of a long way. I mean, but you made it.
I'm alive.
You're alive. It's a hell of a climb.
Yes.
Ah, lordy. You're a better man than I am, Gunga Din.
The last time.
Well, look, it could have been the last time, you know? Dear oh dear. Speaking of the last time, before we get into the stuff of the day and the week and the moment, March the 6th. I mentioned to you when the Battle of the Alamo actually began. I think it was, longer than that. Well, many days ago. It ended on this day. It was 13 days, that's what it was. 13 days. 1836, the Battle of the Alamo finally finished. 1,500. Well, they can't be sure, but somewhere between 1,500 and 3,000 Mexican soldiers overwhelmed the Texan defenders, which numbered, I think, about 150, 160. And what surprised me, why I mention it again, was I've never seen these figures before. They killed all the Texans who were there, defending what ultimately turned out to be Texas. William Travis, a name that is right there in history and in the movies as well, William Travis. He was in the movie, The Alamo, that's the one with John Wayne. He was only 26 years old. Jim Bowie, after whom the Bowie knife and all of that was named, he was 39. And Davy Crockett, I think they gave him the rank of colonel, Davy Crockett was only 49. Terribly young, idealistic though. Idealistic. What can I tell you? George Nissan of Cedar Rapids in Iowa, on this day in 1945, he receives a patent for the first modern trampoline. Now, why, I don't know. Can you imagine what goes through somebody's mind where he's inventing something? I know, I'll put these struts around and then stretch across a piece of material and then jump up and down on it, and then think that that's worthy of going and getting a patent for. But I tell you, I mean, people, lots of trampolines around, I suppose. Maybe he was a visionary, a bit like Davy Crockett, in a different concept or context. 2018, the American World War II aircraft carrier, the USS Lexington, was rediscovered in Australia's Coral Sea. Lost during the 1942 Battle of the Coral Sea, which we were talking about the other day as the turning point of, well, if it wasn't the turning point of World War II, it certainly was the war in the Pacific. Michelangelo, the Italian sculptor, painter, architect and poet, David, the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, and countless other amazing miracles of art. Born in Tuscany on this day in 1475. An unnamed Italian industrialist lost on this day $1,920,000 at roulette over 5 hours in a Monte Carlo casino. This day in 1974. Do you imagine anyone being so stupid? I must talk to you about gambling generally, because I don't understand the way we allow the proliferation of gambling ads on television, particularly where, I mean, you can say gamble responsibly or whatever the disclaimer is, but the point is you're promoting the culture of gambling, and that is to children. You don't know who's in the room. We should do something about that. Nancy Reagan, First Lady from 1981 to 1989, dies at the age of 94. She was born in 1921. She died this day in 2016. The British Union flag begins to be unfurled. Well, what happened was, it was above Buckingham Palace whenever the British monarch was not in residence. All of that changed after the death of Diana. They changed the protocol on this day in 1996. And aspirin, 1899, aspirin, patented by Felix Hoffmann at the German company Bayer, or probably better pronounced Bayer, I suppose. But you know it's made from the bark of a willow tree? Aspirin? Miracle drug. You hear all sorts of amazing qualities and properties of aspirin. 1899. The Tibetan leader, the Dalai Lama, is vaccinated against COVID-19 and urges everybody else to do the same thing. That was 2021. Gottlieb Daimler, the German engineer and inventor, designed the first motorcycle, 1900, which was the precursor to the motor car. He dies at the age of 65. Valentina Tereshkova, the Soviet cosmonaut, first woman in space, they say. I've seen stories about the fact that there were recordings of people picking up the transmission from space of other Russian women long before Valentina Tereshkova. What happened to them, I don't know. But that's just maybe apocryphal, maybe mischievous, I don't know. That was 1937. She was born in Russia. And Cyrano de Bergerac, French playwright and novelist, remembered more for his large nose. There was a movie somebody made. What was it called? Roxanne, I remember that. Very funny movie. Anyway, Cyrano de Bergerac, he was born 1619. And if you remember the day, I hope it's a very happy one for you. The December quarter, just looking at some of the fiscal things, financial things, the December quarter grew by 0.5%, about 2% for the whole year. But that's okay, growth is growth. Inflation, well, down a tad, a smidge, nothing to celebrate. But, you know, quite honestly, not a bad result. We're certainly not in a recession. I mentioned the other day that for the first time there were more people who were overweight than hungry. They now tell us that by 2035, half the people in the world will be obese or overweight. Half the people, 4 to 4.5 billion people. The bad news for Australia is that 38% of us is overweight. 38%. But the really strange thing is that the Australian of the Year, and I take nothing away from her, she's a crusader, I like people with a cause. Karen Bromford, I think her name is, South Australian. She says it doesn't matter. Darling, I love you, but I don't think you're right. She says, be proud of whatever shape or weight you are. Learn to love it. Learn to love yourself. Now, is this the wrong message? Well, I certainly think so. I think at least we can say she's sending conflicting or contradictory messages to the health advocates in our country. Being overweight is not good. Now, I know that. God, I've got to lose, I think I set my eye on 2 stone. Pete, how much is 2 stone?
Oh, it's about
12 kilos?
No, I don't know.
I don't think in metric.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's a lot.
70 kilos is 11 stone.
Okay.
I know that's just what I mean. 70 kilos is 11 stone.
So you're 11 stone?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I should be, I'd be happy with 12, clearly. Let's not go into it. Then again, look, I tell you what.
You're a lot taller than me.
Yeah, no, look, this Karen is the Australian of the Year, so she's going to get some gravitas. She's going to get some influence. There's no doubt about it. But obesity is the #1 health issue in Australia, if not the world. Stuart Robert, the name probably rings a bell. He's been in the news of late. Stuart Robert, the minister in the previous Liberal government, he has taken responsibility for the robo-debt situation. Now, no one can defend, or should defend, the robo-debt business. It was reprehensible, in my opinion, and in most other people's opinion as well. But would somebody please call out the previous Labor government? This is the government that put women and men in jail over Centrelink fraud. I've mentioned this to you before, but as this is really now very, very current and the Royal Commission is heating up, I want to mention it again. Based on a law that didn't even exist, that Labor government under, it was the Gillard Labor government, I'm pretty sure, they were putting people in jail and fining them for Centrelink fraud using a law that didn't even exist. And I have to thank Michael Abbott, a very clever QC here in South Australia, for discovering that. But you won't see many journalists pointing it out or doing stories on it. And the other thing that I thought very strange, hours before the High Court declared that this law didn't exist, just hours before, the Labor government, led by the Attorney General, Tanya Plibersek, retrospectively changed the law to read what they wanted it to read in the first place. So people just, and I must admit they have a point, because there would have been tens of thousands of people who would claim compensation for that discovery. How can you fine me, jail me? How can you do that using a law that doesn't exist? Can you imagine what it would have cost the government? A fortune. And it's not that long ago that this happened, you know. Now, is that selective forgetfulness on behalf of the media? There was no Royal Commission, no questions asked about that travesty of justice and administration. Appalling. Be fair. You know, the pot calling the kettle black? The whole problem goes back to the business of Labor governments trying to get as many people on welfare as they possibly can. I know that for a fact, because I was there on the very day that the head of Social Security, as it was then called here in South Australia, sat in my studio taking calls from my listeners about pensions and such like. And she made this comment, I'll quote it. She made this comment. She told my listeners, if they weren't on a pension, to call, and she gave a number, as it was their Social Security, and I quote, if you're not on a pension, we will fit you in somewhere. This is disgraceful, and quite frankly, I told her so. But we were on two different planets. No. Anyway, I've been talking about that incident ever since, because to me it typifies just what is wrong with this. You know, the state owes me a living. For these things to be called out, and they should be, we first need journalists who can remember, and then we need journalists who want to remember. Selective memory based on, I don't know, is it political prejudice? I think that might be what we're dealing with here. Here in South Australia, the role of the electric car charging terminals is an interesting one. They're pushing forward with more of these charging points around our city and state with the help of the RAA. That's like the NRMA in Sydney or the RACV in Melbourne, and the state government's involved in that as well. Now, I won't say they're woke individuals. You've got to give them some credit and say, well, their heart is probably in the right place because they think they're doing what's right. But do any of these individuals care to talk about the subject that we brought up on this program last week, I think it was, about the exploitation of children in Africa for the mining of these rare earth minerals, cobalt in particular? Why would we be supporting, or at least not calling out or criticizing, an industry that exploited children as young as 9 years old? Just because we can't see these kids smashing rocks in a mine for $2 a day doesn't mean they don't exist. They do. I told you about them. You know about it. I know about it. Perhaps the government, dare I say the RAA, I don't know. Maybe they don't want to know about it. But you wouldn't be promoting electric cars or putting out charging terminals, would you? Until you fixed that problem. I just think it's a disgrace to promote, almost to promote electric anything. And I don't want to be a purist or a hypocrite, because this Canon camera that I'm talking to you now, and if you're listening to me on a podcast somewhere, on a mobile phone, there is a lithium-ion battery in that phone. And I say we have to address this problem of what is going on in Africa with the exploitation of people to provide us with this modern technology. Anyway, as I say, it's not a perfect world, is it? Very imperfect world. Thank you very much for viewing the Court of Public Opinion, ladies and gentlemen. We will be back tomorrow. I'm Jeremy Cordeaux. Peter Clayton is with me, and tomorrow I hope you will be as well. Believe in yourself, and thank you for viewing.